Hey there guys, we're just going to have a look at what we did in class the other day as the first part of this, and then we're going to look at how to make a moving player. Now, to make what we did in class the other day, we have a floor and an orb already set up. If we click play, I've added a rigid body, as you can see on the right hand side here, to the orb. So physics will apply and it will just roll down the floor off into nowhere. Just going to go ahead and add another cube. This one here, I'll go into the y-axis, move it forward. X-axis, move it down a little bit so it's at the bottom of the thing. I'm then going to go to the scale tool and I'm just going to drag it out. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit just for the aesthetic. Alright, there we go. This cube I'm going to rename into trigger area, and I'm going to turn its mesh renderer off. I can in fact delete these if I wanted to, but I'll just leave them here for now. So components that it has, it's got transform, so some position within the space. It has mesh, although we're not using it. It looks like something, but turned off. And it has a box collider. That's all we're worried about, this green area. Now we want to make sure, most importantly, that this is a trigger area, so we'll hit is trigger, and we're going to add a component. This is going to be called reset set orb, reset orb. This doesn't actually exist, so I've got to make a new script and create an add. Alright, we see that it's made that script called reset orb. We'll just reload. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder for all of my scripts and just drag that reset orb one straight into there. Cool as so. We'll go to that trigger area. We can either double click here or on the script in our assets and open it up in VS Code or Visual Studios. Alright, so here is our script all opened up. If we go ahead and zoom in a little bit, we have the start void and update void. I've explained those in class, so we'll just zoom ahead a little bit. We're going to make another void. This one's going to be called on trigger enter. And unlike these voids up ahead, it actually needs a parameter. A collider, and we'll call this thing a thing that entered the trigger. So what we want to do is we want to reset whatever enters the trigger back to its beginning position. So firstly we need there's a couple ways to do this, but we'll make a float for the X position, and that's going to equal whatever number it is. We're going to make a float for the Y position. That's going to equal whatever number that is. We're going to make a float for the Z position, and that's going to equal whatever number that is. We're then going to need to check what is the actual thing that entered the trigger area. We'll assume that it's the orb. So we're going to get this thing that entered the trigger area, and we are going to get its transform value. And as you see here, this is exactly what we're going to write. We're going to update its position, and we're going to make that a new vector 3. And a vector 3 is a three-dimensional coordinate. So it's going to have the X position, the Y position, and the Z position. So this is what the code's going to look like, but we better fill in these gaps. So if we have a look back at our orb, its X, Y, and Z position are all given right here. So 0, 2.57, and 0. Nice and easy. 0, 2.57, 0. Now, it may be problematic because these are whole numbers or double, so we'll just put an F to denote that these are all floating point numbers. We'll save this, Control S. Back in Unity, it'll have to reload because we made changes to the script. Awesome. So now what we should see, it has reset orb, and we'll go ahead and play. We should see that when the orb rolls into this trigger area, because it is a trigger area, it should go back to its original position and then keep being thrown back to where it is. Now the next thing we want to do is go up to the top view, and I'm going to move my orb over to the left. I'm going to copy it with just a Control C, Control V, and put one over on the other side. I'll move it over to the right and one on the other side. When I click play, I'm going to notice that they're both going to hit at the same time because they're aligned on that axis. And then they're both actually going to teleport here. You'll notice that they're slightly staggered, but they're all coming from here. I want them to come from wherever they just came from. So we're going to make our code a little bit inefficient. There's a more efficient way of doing this. But just for testing purposes, to check out how to do it, we'll have a look. So the one on the right, we're going to call orb right. The one on the left, we're going to call orb left. So the only difference between orb right and orb left is this Z position, because that's the axis that moved on. So we can agree that these are the positions of the, except for the Z because that's changed. These two are going to be the same, they're going to be a constant. This one is going to change depending on the orb. Alright, so what we want to call this instead is Z position R for the right. And my right orb, if we have a look, right, has its 2.42 as the value. And we're going to make another one, Z position left. And that one has a value of negative 2.14. Negative 2.14. Oops. It's a bit big. F for floating point. We'll notice this is no longer blue because it's no longer a variable that exists, which is fine. What we need to do is we need to say whether it's the left or the right orb to determine what one of these two things should go in here. The only difference between these two orbs at the moment, except for their position, is their name. One's called orb right, one's called orb left. So we can simply check if the thing that entered the trigger area dot name equals is equal to, and then in quotation marks, orb left, then we're going to, I'll just copy this, Control C, Control V. We're going to make the thing that entered the trigger area, which we now know has the name orb left. We're going to change its transform position to a new vector 3 using the Z position L, because that's the left one. Else if the thing that entered the trigger area dot name equals orb right, we're gonna do this, just tab that over, but instead use the R value. So let's save that and go back into Unity. Alright, so now when we click play, they both come down, and so they're both restarting from the same position. For a more tactile way of viewing this, we're also going to make them debug.log quotation marks left orb entered trigger, and for simplicity I'll copy that. This one's going to say right orb entered trigger. Save that. Back into Unity. And I'll go into my console so I can see my debug. I'll click play. They should happen very, very close to each other because they are sort of same. So the left orb, the right orb, the left orb, the right orb, and it just keeps on going each time they enter the trigger area. It is telling me which one entered when, if they were more staggered. Clear that up. There'd be a more obvious differentiation of time. Right orb, left orb, right orb. And then it just keeps going like that. Alright. So that's what we did in class the other day. What we're going to look at doing today is making a whole new scene to make a player move around on. So to make a new scene, I have this nice little folder here called scenes. I'm just going to go into it. There is the sample scene, which is probably the one that you're using right now, and physics and triggers, which is the one that I've made specifically for this. We're going to make a new scene by just right clicking, go and create and scene, and we're going to call this one player movement. Double click, it'll ask, do we want to save this scene, physics and triggers? Yours will probably be called sample scene. Yeah, I'll save it, and this will open up. Boom. We haven't lost everything. It still exists, just in a different scene. Scenes you can think of as game worlds or something like that. For this one, it's going to be nice and simple. We're just going to make a floor. Oops, that's a sphere, not a cube. Make it nice and wide, maybe 10, 10, 0.2, so it's not too thick. I actually have a texture that I'm going to use, and I've already dragged it on to the last floor, so it's made a material for me, so I can just use that in my materials folder. It automatically makes the materials folder too. I'm then going to go ahead and create a capsule. This is going to be my player. Now there's a few different ways you can do player movement, but this is the easiest way because the scripts are written for you. I'm going to call this, oops, player, PL, player. I'm even going to tag it as the player so that later on when we start to use tags, that's all set. I'm going to call this cube the floor. Now, a few things about my player. This is going to be a first-person experience, which means that the camera is inside, acting as the player's eyes, and the only camera I have is this main camera. So I'm going to drag this object into my player. These values of position are relative to the main player object, which is this. So if I change them all to 0, it'll be exactly inside. Now the only issue is that he's seeing sort of out of his torso, so I'm just going to drag it up a little bit so it's more at eye level. So when I click on main camera, you can see down the bottom this is what this guy sees. Alright, so like I said, there are some scripts already made for you, and these are going to be linked in the video description, but they'll also be on your class website. The link will take you to here with these two scripts. All we need to do is right click and download them. So I download mouse look, which is going to be our camera movement, and I'll download player movement, which is going to be, you know, making the player move. The quickest way is we can just drag them straight from here into Unity, or in Unity itself, and we'll jump back over there. we can grab those scripts and just drag them in. I'm going to drag them into my scripts folder. Player movement, the other one. Cool. So now I have 3 scripts. One that we've written, which is that reset orb one from before, and 2 that I have written that you can just use. So we want our player to have the player movement script so that he can move, and we want our camera to have the mouse look script so it can look around. Don't know why it added 2. There we go. Now put all the rest up so that only the scripts are showing. And this also added 2. Okay. Now, the way that this script here works, as we see, it has some variables that we need to set straight away. It needs a controller on our player. So let's go ahead and find one. We type in controller, we have a character controller, and we can literally drag this character controller up to this value here. So the character controller that the player wants to use is this one. You can notice a few things that it does, but we'll get into that later on. Speed dictates how fast he moves, and gravity dictates how fast he drops. You can change these values if they're too small or too big, but we'll test that out by actually playing our game. The next thing here is this thing called ground check. We need to make a little object that our player will carry around with him, like the camera, at his feet. So if we just right click on player and go create empty, we're going to call this one GC for ground check. And I'm just going to drag it down to his feet. So it's underneath him, just floating down there. So the ground check, if I click on this, is going to be the object called GC. Ground distance is how far away GC is from the ground, but that doesn't matter too much. Last we have this ground mask. At the moment we'll just set it to everything. So everything is going to be considered the ground. Now, that's our player setup. That's that player movement script, has everything plugged in. It's just the main camera now. The main camera has a mouse sensitivity, which you can move up and down depending on if you need to. And it wants to know what the player's body is. Well, the player's body is actually our object called player. You can see the little icon for transform, so it wants to know the position of the player's body. So you can just go ahead and drag player straight into there. Alternatively, you can click on this little dot and select player from the list. So now, let's try it out. We'll click play. It'll load. So I can look around by moving the mouse. I can click so it goes in. I can walk around by using WASD or the arrow keys. And do everything like that. If I fall off the edge, oh no, the gravity may be a bit light. I'm very slowly falling away. Now because I clicked, I can't actually access my cursor. So I need to hit escape, and then I can go back up to closing this. So that is how you can make a player move around your world very quick and easily by making this player object and using the scripts that are already written for you.